Everyone thinks wealth is created by ideas, hustle, and luck. But the truth is far simpler and far more uncomfortable. For more than 3 centuries, wealth has flowed to whoever stands closest to a rule written in the aftermath of a disaster. A disaster so violent it wiped out fortunes across London, Paris, and Amsterdam in the same year, 1720. You've heard of the South Sea Bubble. Maybe you learned the official story, a speculative frenzy, naive investors, a few scheming insiders. But that's the fairy tale for textbooks. The real cause wasn't mania. It was a structural flaw in money itself, a flaw governments refused to fix, and instead quietly encoded into law, where it still operates today. Picture the world in 1720. England is drowning in war debt. France has just witnessed John Law's Mississippi scheme implode. The Dutch are watching their merchant credit freeze. This wasn't a bubble. It was a continent-wide liquidity crisis. Everyone owed money to someone else, and nobody could pay in real coin. Gold wasn't just scarce, it was gridlocked. The entire financial system was a hall of mirrors propped up by promises that couldn't be settled in metal. So Parliament made a decision. They didn't fix the scarcity of money. They decided who would be allowed to create money-like claims and who wouldn't. They built a privileged circle around one institution, the Bank of England, founded in 1694, and insulated it from the failures that destroyed ordinary investors. In 1720, a rule was reinforced that only certain chartered bodies could issue large-scale credit and enjoy government protection when their bets went wrong. Everyone else? They were left to burn. That is the real paradox. We imagine markets reward risk-takers. But since 1720, the biggest returns have gone to those who could operate with state-backed immunity. Credit became a ladder, but only a few were allowed to climb it. The same pattern you see in modern bailouts, central bank liquidity windows, and too big to fail was already visible when London was still lit by candles. What collapsed in 1720 was speculation. What survived was the hierarchy. And that hierarchy, who may issue credit, who may be rescued, who may expand when others go bankrupt, still determines who gets rich today. Everyone remembers the explosions of 1720. The South Sea Company in London, the Mississippi Company in Paris, the speculative contagion spreading across Europe. But almost nobody remembers the quiet architecture built underneath those explosions. And if you want to understand why a tiny circle still captures wealth today, you need to look at the decades before the collapse, when the rules of modern money were being written by men who understood one thing. Power comes not from owning gold, but from deciding who is allowed to promise gold. Let's step back to the 1690s. England is fighting Louis XIV. War is expensive and Parliament is desperate. The state needs cash immediately, but gold is limited, taxes are slow, and the crown's credit is shaky. In 1694, a group of wealthy creditors approached the government with an offer that seems almost magical. They will lend the crown £1.2 million, a colossal sum, in exchange for the right to form a corporation. But not just any corporation. A corporation allowed to issue banknotes backed not by gold, but by the government's own IOUs. Imagine what that means. Instead of digging metal out of the ground, this group manufactures money by holding government debt and printing notes against it. They lend to the state, then use that loan to create a new kind of private asset. This hybrid creature becomes the Bank of England. This is where the system begins. Not with bubbles, but with a political deal. Creditors fund the state, and the state grants them the privilege to expand credit beyond their metal reserves. Everything else in the next 300 years is a variation of this arrangement. Fast forward to the early 1700s. Europe is now a battleground of empires, armies, and navies that burn money faster than any tax base can provide. States need elastic money, something that stretches in wartime and contracts in peace, something gold alone cannot give. But elasticity is only safe if a single entity controls it. Too many issuers create chaos, as France learned in 1719 when John Law allowed his Banque Royale to merge with the Mississippi Company and issue paper far beyond what confidence could bear. So England chooses the opposite path. Parliament doesn't eliminate private credit, it centralizes it. In 1708 and again in 1720, the Bubble Act tightens the rule. No large joint stock company may issue transferable shares or notes without state approval. The Bank of England becomes the core. Other companies may exist, but none can challenge its monetary privilege. The South Sea Company receives political favor, but no right to issue money. The East India Company receives trade monopolies, but not monetary power. The Bank of England alone holds the magic, the ability to turn government debt into circulating money. When the crisis hits in 1720, this architecture is tested. The South Sea Company's scheme collapses because its promises cannot be transformed into liquid credit. Its shares rise on enthusiasm, but cannot settle the debts of a nation. The Bank of England, by contrast, survives because it operates under a different rule. When panic spreads, it can issue notes, discount bills, and roll over government loans. It can expand when everyone else contracts. It is protected by Parliament, not judged by the market. Here is the hidden truth. The crisis doesn't destroy the system, it finalizes it. The Bubble Act, often portrayed as a simple anti-fraud measure, is actually a consolidation of monetary power. It ensures that only the bank may act as the state's financial engine. It locks in the 1694 arrangement and turns it into a permanent structure of the British Empire. From this point, fortunes shift. Merchants and speculators can rise and fall, but the institutional creditors, the bank, the chartered houses connected to the treasury, the families with access to long-term government debt, begin to compound their wealth across generations, not because they are smarter, but because the rules protect their role in the credit machine. This is the system being built, a triangle of state, central bank, and debt. Governments need money, central banks create it from the government's IOUs, and those closest to the issuance become the gatekeepers of liquidity. Everyone else operates downstream. You see the mechanism forming. It's elegant, powerful, and deeply unequal. In the centuries to come, this structure will finance the Royal Navy, industrial expansion, colonial administration, and global trade. It will make Britain the financial capital of the world. But it starts with a simple decision after 1720. In moments of crisis, the state will protect the institution that creates credit, not the investors who gamble with it. And that decision still shapes wealth today. If this revealed a layer of history you never saw before, tell me where you're watching from. Everyone believes systems like this grow because they are efficient. But the truth is they grow because they tell a beautiful lie. A lie so comforting that entire nations accept it without question. After 1720, Britain enters exactly this kind of golden illusion. And if you pay attention, you'll notice it's the same pattern that repeats today whenever credit expands faster than reality. Picture the scene after the Bubble Act settles the dust. London is wounded, but the core institutions are intact. The Bank of England has emerged not as a victim, but as the central pillar of stability. And now comes the illusion, the belief that if one institution controls credit, crises will be prevented forever. Parliament believes it, merchants believe it, ordinary people believe it because they want to. We see the beginnings of modern financial confidence. Banknotes circulate more easily. Bills of exchange, essentially IOUs that move like money, spread across commercial networks. The public begins to trust paper again, slowly, because they believe there's a gatekeeper who won't let the system drown itself in promises. This belief triggers growth. Trade expands. Loans become common. The government borrows more cheaply because the bank absorbs its debt. Wars that once strained the treasury now seem manageable. The illusion is that the system has become self-sustaining. Look at the 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763. It becomes one of the most expensive conflicts in British history up to that point, more than £160 million in combined costs across the empire. Yet instead of collapsing under its own weight, Britain finances it through enormous issuances of government debt, rolled and re-rolled through the Bank of England's machinery. This is the monetary engine of empire. Credit backed by confidence, confidence backed by a monopoly, and a monopoly protected by law. Growth accelerates because the constraint of gold becomes softer. The country still uses gold coin, but daily commerce depends on paper backed by the state's promises. As long as people trust that paper can be turned into gold, even if it can't all be redeemed at once, the system hums. This is the illusion stage, expansion built not on metal, but on belief. You see the same logic in the rise of the East India Company. It conquers Bengal in 1757 and gains access to tax revenues larger than most European kingdoms. But the company doesn't fund its conquests with stored treasure. It funds them with credit, bills issued in Calcutta, accepted in London, discounted by bankers who believe the empire will always be solvent. When you hold the financial plumbing together, even a merchant company becomes a sovereign power. And London begins to transform, from a port city into the world's clearinghouse. Every ship entering the Thames brings not only goods but paper claims, debt, bills, shares, notes, that flow through a system now trusted by everyone who wants to get rich. Trust becomes the commodity, and the Bank of England becomes the factory. This is the heart of the illusion, the belief that as long as credit expands in an orderly manner, everyone will prosper. But order doesn't come from nature. It comes from the rule, born in 1720, that only one institution may expand credit with state backing. When people think the system is safe, they borrow more. When they borrow more, lenders become bold. When lenders become bold, speculation returns, only this time it hides behind the veneer of respectable finance. By the 1780s, Britain seems invincible. The empire is growing, industrialization is brewing, trade routes stretch from Jamaica to Bombay. But behind the scenes, the same arithmetic that doomed John Law is quietly accumulating. Credit growing faster than gold, promises growing faster than income, government debt growing faster than tax revenue. Every era of growth has its soundtrack, and in London it's the scratching of quills on ledgers, the stamping of bills, the shouts of brokers on Exchange Alley. They believe they've solved the cycle of booms and busts. They believe centralization equals safety. They believe numbers on paper can rise indefinitely as long as confidence stays high. You know this feeling. You've seen it in every modern boom. The dot-com surge, the housing bubble, the era of unlimited liquidity after 2008. The illusion never changes. The details do. In the 1700s, it was bills of exchange. In the 2000s, it was mortgage-backed securities. But the psychology is the same. When credit expands painlessly, people assume mathematics has been conquered. But arithmetic waits, quietly, patiently, without emotion. And when the numbers drift too far from the real world, the same institutions that fueled the boom must decide who will be saved and who will be sacrificed. For now, though, London believes it has mastered money itself. Illusion becomes confidence, and confidence becomes empire. Everyone thinks collapses arrive like storms, sudden, dramatic, unpredictable. But the truth is far simpler. Collapses arrive when arithmetic finally speaks louder than politics. The British system born after 1720 wasn't immune to this law. It simply postponed the reckoning longer than other nations. Yet even the strongest illusions crack when the claims on wealth grow faster than the wealth itself. By the 1790s, Britain is locked in a struggle with revolutionary France. The war drains the treasury, devours gold reserves, and forces the government to borrow on a scale unprecedented in British history. The numbers turn brutal. Government debt surpasses £400 million, nearly 200% of GDP. The empire is powerful, but its commitments are larger. London's bankers watch gold flow out of the country to pay for imported grain, naval equipment, and coalition subsidies to Prussia and Austria. They see the same pattern that destroyed John Law in Paris. Paper promises rising, while the metal backing them slips away. The Bank of England tries to maintain the illusion. It keeps redeeming notes for gold, keeps discounting bills, keeps assuring the public that paper is as good as coin. But arithmetic tightens like a noose. By 1797, the bank's gold reserves fall below 1 million pounds, an amount too small to handle even a few days of widespread withdrawals. Remember this moment. It is the first time Britain faces the full exposure of the system built after 1720. Everyone can see the contradiction. The empire's financial engine is running on confidence, not metal, and confidence is evaporating. Then comes the spark. Rumors swirl that French troops have landed in Wales. Panic spreads. People rush to the bank demanding gold. The bank cannot continue redemptions without destroying itself. Parliament steps in, not to save the public, but to protect the core institution. In February 1797, the government issues the Bank Restriction Act, suspending the convertibility of banknotes into gold. This is the moment when mathematics breaks politics. The promise behind every note, "I promise to pay the bearer on demand," becomes a historical fiction. The empire's money is now a legal illusion, backed not by metal, but by Parliament's decree. Britain has entered a new monetary world, paper without convertibility. But here's the irony. The collapse doesn't destroy the system. It exposes its true nature. The Bank of England isn't punished. It's empowered. The government uses the suspension to issue vast amounts of new debt, which the bank monetizes. War spending accelerates. Credit expands. Prices rise. Small savers suffer, but the institutions tied to government finance thrive. The same rule that was established in 1720, that certain entities must be protected so the state can survive, is once again enforced. Ordinary people see inflation. Merchants see volatility. But creditors close to the government see a windfall. They hold claims that will be honored because the bank cannot be allowed to fail. This is the hidden moral of 1797. The moment the link to gold is suspended, wealth does not disappear, it is redistributed, away from the public, toward the institutions shielded by political necessity. And yet the exposure is not over. In the following years, critics like William Cobbett and David Ricardo argue that the nation has been trapped by its own financial mechanism. Ricardo shows that prices rise because the bank prints too many unbacked notes. Cobbett denounces the system as a machine that enriches loan contractors while the laborers' wages are devalued. Their criticism marks the first public recognition of a truth we take for granted today. Paper money is a political instrument, not an economic one. By 1810, the Bullion Committee investigates the situation. Their conclusion is explosive for the era. Inflation is not caused by war or shortages, but by the bank's unrestricted issuance of notes. The arithmetic is undeniable. The more promises created at the top, the more the bottom pays for it through rising prices. Finally, in 1821, after nearly 24 years of suspended convertibility, Britain returns to the gold standard. It celebrates this as a victory of discipline. But the real victory happened earlier, in 1797, when Britain learned it could sustain an empire not with gold, but with controlled paper, so long as the institution issuing that paper held state protection. This is the exposure phase. The system doesn't collapse, it reveals itself. It shows that credit is political. It shows that liquidity is allocated, not neutral. It shows that when arithmetic corners the state protects the core and lets the periphery absorb the pain. Sound familiar? It should. It's the same blueprint you saw in 2008, the same pattern during the repo crisis of 2019, the same logic behind emergency liquidity injections in 2020. In every case, when pressure rises, the state chooses who gets saved. And the choice follows the rule first hardened in 1720. Protect the credit engine, no matter the cost. Everyone assumes the past is gone, sealed off, irrelevant, dusty. But the truth is far sharper. The rule forged after 1720 didn't stay in the 18th century. It became the hidden operating system of modern economies. If you've ever wondered why the same people, the same institutions, the same types of corporations seem to survive every crisis and come out richer, you're looking at the long shadow of that decision. Because once Britain discovered that control of credit mattered more than the metal behind it, the entire economic order realigned. The empire ran on a quiet principle. Whoever sits closest to the creation of money-like promises becomes the natural winner of every cycle. You see it with the Victorian railways, with colonial trade, with the invention of the joint stock corporation, but the clearest proof arrives centuries later when the same hierarchy reappears in modern banking. Look at 1907, the American Panic. J.P. Morgan personally coordinates liquidity because the U.S. government cannot. Why does Morgan have so much power? Because he controls the credit lines that everyone else depends on, just like the Bank of England did 2 centuries earlier. The crisis ends not with a collapse, but with the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, explicitly designed to play the same role the Bank of England perfected: lender of last resort, protector of the core, allocator of liquidity. Then look at 1931, when Britain finally abandons the gold standard for the last time. The newspapers call it a humiliation, but the financial elite know better. They know it simply formalizes the power structure already in place. Money is confidence. Confidence comes from the state, and the institutions closest to the state become the engines of wealth creation. When you live under this rule, collapses don't destroy the system, they reorganize it around the same privileged center. Jump to 1944. The Bretton Woods system places the US dollar at the global core. Countries must hold dollar reserves, which means they must hold US debt, which means the United States, like Britain before it, finances its power not with gold, but with promises that the world treats as money. The mechanism is identical: a central institution, legally protected, issuing claims that everyone else must treat as liquid. Then 1971 arrives. Nixon closes the gold window. The world enters full paper money for the first time in history. You might expect chaos. Instead, the hierarchy simply adjusts. The U.S. Treasury market becomes the core collateral of the world. The Federal Reserve becomes the manager of global liquidity. And just like in 1720, those closest to the issuance of safe assets, major banks, primary dealers, financial intermediaries, become the first recipients of new money every time the system strains. But the clearest echo, the one that looks almost like a photocopy of 1797, emerges in 2008. A housing bubble collapses, banks face insolvency, markets freeze, and governments must choose: save the public or save the credit engine. They choose exactly as Parliament did 2 centuries earlier. They save the engine. They rescue the institutions whose survival is systemic. They expand the money supply through the central bank. They suspend the old constraints. Not gold convertibility, but the ideological promise that markets punish failure. It's the same rule, updated for the digital age. Credit at the core must survive. You see the exact script play out again during the 2020 liquidity crisis. Markets crash. Treasury markets seize. The Federal Reserve opens swap lines, repo facilities, emergency backstops. Exactly the tools the Bank of England improvised between 1797 and 1821. Money is created not by printing presses, but through institutional privilege. Whoever holds the right collateral, the right access, the right proximity, survives. Meanwhile, the periphery pays the price. Workers face unemployment. Small businesses fail. Savers see inflation erode purchasing power. Just as in the early 1800s, the burden of stabilization shifts downward, while the benefits of liquidity flow upward. This is the modern echo, the illusion of a free market built on a very unfree foundation. A foundation where access to credit, not productivity, not innovation, not effort, determines who compounds wealth across generations. Look around today. Major banks borrow at near zero rates because they have access to central bank windows. Corporations issue debt at scale because asset managers treat their bonds as safe enough. Governments support markets by purchasing securities with money created from nothing. But households? They borrow at high rates, face credit limits, and have no lender of last resort. The system didn't disappear. It evolved. The Bubble Act became banking regulation. The Bank Restriction Act became quantitative easing. The hierarchy of 1720 became the global pyramid of dollar liquidity. And here's the final twist. The mechanism isn't evil. It's rational. States must privilege the credit engine because the alternative is collapse. But rationality doesn't equal fairness. The structure works, but it works unevenly. The consequence is simple and devastating. Wealth flows toward the center because the center creates the promises everyone else must use. Everyone thinks systems collapse because someone did something wrong. A reckless banker, a greedy monarch, a corrupt parliament. But the truth is colder. Systems collapse when the numbers they create outrun the real world beneath them. That was the lesson of 1720, of 1797, of 2008. And it's the rule still shaping your life today. If you strip away the centuries, you see the same pattern repeating like a quiet drumbeat. A society builds promises, debts, credits, shares, expectations, faster than it builds the real wealth to support them. Confidence lifts everything for a while. The illusion feels like progress. Then arithmetic arrives, and arithmetic never negotiates. This is the real warning. You and I live in an age where promises grow at digital speed, where liquidity can be created with keystrokes, where the hierarchy of credit has become global, not national. The structure works as long as confidence holds, but confidence is not infinite, and neither is trust. When the next train comes, whether from war, inflation, technological disruption, or political fracture, the old rule will activate again. The protected core will be saved, the periphery will absorb the shock, and once more, people will ask why the system failed, when in truth, it worked exactly as designed. If you're hearing this in 2025, remember one thing. Wealth is no longer just about income or intelligence. It is about proximity. Proximity to the institutions that create money-like claims. Proximity to the rules that decide who gets rescued and who doesn't. The hierarchy born after 1720 still decides which risks are rewarded and which risks are punished. It still defines who compounds wealth quietly while others ride the roller coaster. But this isn't a message of despair. It's a message of awareness. Systems only feel inevitable when you don't understand them. Once you see the architecture, once you recognize the illusion stage, the exposure stage, the protection of the core, you stop being surprised by crises and start reading them like weather patterns. The moral is simple. Empires don't fall from bad intentions. They fall when trust stretches farther than gold, income, or reality can support. Don't let your own decisions stretch the same way.